5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
TNT, our explosive new slogan that the Democrats ought to be using. Truth, not tyranny, Sam, right?
Absolutely.
That encapsulates both sides of what the Democrats would have to say. That is, the truth is, this is what we have done for ordinary Americans, for everyday Jane and John Doe, and this is what we'll do for you if you restore us to power. That's half of the explosive slogan. The other half is tyranny. That's what you get from Donald Trump, who is by far the most authoritarian president we have ever had on this country, who has done nothing for John and Jane Doe America. He has only enriched himself, enriched his very wealthy friends, and cracked down on our freedoms. Look what he just did in Scotland, Sam.
What
Did
do
you
you do?
follow that?
I mean, what specifically are you talking about?
It's on our dime. It's an official trip. We paid for it, and he's pumping up his private golf courses.
Oh,
That's something no American president has ever done before, and no American president should ever be doing it. Mixing official business with attempt to line his pockets.
he he
Truth,
he's been doing
not
that for
tyranny.
10 years.
I know, but and now it's just so blatant. But I'm not gonna fall for this syndrome. Oh, Trump always does this. It's just Trump. Why bother call? No, we have to call it out every single time he does it. We can't just submit to this gish gallop. Oh, he always does it. It's not news. It's no big. Yes, it's a big deal every time he exposes these extreme conflicts of interest.
I agree. You're right.
But what I really want to talk about tonight is something that has been so misrepresented, so misunderstood by even well-meaning, usually very accurate media. And that is mass shootings in the United States, and more broadly, gun homicides in the United States. Because, the 90% plus, maybe even higher, of mass killings and woundings, that is, an episode that kills or wounds at least 4 people, it's always guns. It's not, the NRA says, oh, guns don't kill people, people do. No, people kill people using guns, not using, clubs or knives or poison. That's not how mass killings take place in the United States. According to the Gun Violence Archive, and they have the most conservative estimates, some of the estimates are close to 300. The killing of 4 innocent people in New York the other day was mass shooting number 254, Sam, so far in 2025. Have there been 254 days yet in 2025? We're about 7 months into it, right?
No.
About 220 some odd. In other words, there is more than one mass shooting in America every single day. That's just astonishing. That's more mass shootings than all of our Democratic allies combined, more than the OECD group of nations combined just in this one country. There's a wonderful satiric commentary in the Onion, the humor magazine, where they say, officials say nothing we can do about these mass shootings, say those who run the only country where it is an enormous problem. And, where the media goes totally off base is this constant, immediate search for a motive. Well, you know what? of the 254 mass shootings, there may be 254 different motives. And for the most part, and 90% plus, we don't know and we'll never know what the motive is. A small number have histories of mental illness. Apparently, this latest shooter does, but the vast majority don't. There's no correlation between mental illness and being a mass shooter. Most don't have a criminal record, including the worst mass shooter, the shooter in Las Vegas who killed dozens of people from a high window in the hotel. Undocumented immigrants, the vicious killers who are about to get us, don't figure at all in mass shootings. Almost all of them are United States citizens. This idea of, this great danger of undocumented immigrants, as we've explained so many times, is one of the most pernicious myths perpetrated by this administration and not called out enough by even their critics. So, what's the one common denominator, Sam, in all of this? There's only one.
Guns.
Guns. The ready availability of guns, particularly semi-automatic weapons, which can be easily converted to automatic weapons. That is the one common denominator in all of these mass shootings. That's why this chasing for motives in each individual case takes us right down the rabbit hole. I would invoke the old Zen saying, unask the question. You're asking the wrong question. The right question is, why in the United States are we so unique in the number and ferocity of mass shootings? All these other nations, they've got mental health problems, some of them, according to surveys, worse than the US. They have poverty problems. They have gang problems. They have drug problems. What they don't have is the kind of loose, almost non-existent gun control measures that exist in the United States. And by the way, mass shootings are the tip of the iceberg of gun homicides in the United States. Last year, there was something on the order of 18,000 gun homicides in America. Nearly 50 gun homicides every single day in America. Think about that. Almost 50 gun homicides, not counting accidents and gun suicides, which would greatly increase the number to close to 25,000, not 18,000. Now, compare that to our most comparable democratic peers, the G7 group of nations, which is countries like England, France, Germany, Canada, Japan, and Australia, are most comparable peer democracies. An American is 20 times more likely to be killed by a gun per capita than a resident of these 7 closest peer democracies. That's not 20% higher. That's 20 times higher, 2,000% higher than those in our peer democracies. So as I said, all suffer from the same issues of mental health, drugs, gangs, poverty. The one common denominator is how we deal with guns as compared to how all of these other nations deal with guns. Now, you may say, oh my God, but in America, we're protected by the Second Amendment, which gives us an unlimited right to keep and bear arms. That is one of the greatest myths in American history. The biggest con job. Even former very conservative Chief Justice Berger called it a great con job. And you know how this came about? It came about in the late 1970s when the National Rifle Association, in the so-called revolt in Cincinnati, was taken over by the extreme supporters of guns and the gun lobby and the gun industry. Before that, and I uncovered the memos, even the NRA admitted that the Second Amendment is tied to a real well-regulated militia and only refers to the right to keep and bear arms as part of the militia, does not provide an individual right to keep and bear arms. Even the NRA admitted it. But after the result in Cincinnati, they pulled off the biggest con job in the history of the country, recruiting mostly lawyers tied to the gun industry and the gun lobby to totally reinterpret in a totally deceptive way the history of the Second Amendment. And do you know who they got as their spokesperson? This was brilliant.
Nope.
Moses, Charlton Heston,
Oh,
the actor who played Moses, one of the more revered figures. You know, he was famous. Remember this famous saying, Sam, you got to pry my gun from my cold, dead hands. And they perpetrated this utter myth, which they knew was wrong, that the Second Amendment protected outside of the militia an individual right to keep and bear arms. That went contrary to a whole string of Supreme Court and appeals court decisions until the infamous Heller case in 2010, when Justice Scalia bought into the NRA arguments and established in I think it was a 5-4 Supreme Court decision along ideological lines that indeed the Second Amendment protected an individual right to keep and bear arms. And while that might leave some latitude for gun control, it poses real strict conditions on controlling guns. As the late, great Justice John Paul Stevens pointed out in his dissent, Scalia was supposed to be the great originalist. We only stick to the plain meaning of the words of the Constitution and as they were understood at the time. And the plain meaning of the Constitution ties the right to keep and bear arms to a well-regulated militia. Moreover, not a single individual, Sam, not a single individual involved in writing, passing in Congress, or ratifying in the states the Second Amendment said it protected an individual right to keep and bear arms aside from the militia. And all the debates that are still around that we have records of in the Congress deal with who can and cannot recuse themselves from the militia, like Quakers. No one was talking about an individual right to bear and keep arms. Sam, do you know who crafted the Second Amendment, the great author of the Bill of Rights?
like the person who did?
Yes, there was very famous. They call him the father of the Constitution.
Thomas Jefferson?
No, close. James Madison.
Ah, dang.
And what did James Madison own?
Slaves.
Slaves, as did lots of those in Congress who voted for the Second Amendment, and lots of those in the states who voted to ratify the Second Amendment. Do you think for one moment all of these slaveholders who are, in grave fear of slave revolts would have voted for an amendment that gave even free Black people a right to keep and bear arms? Not for a second would they have done that. But they could vote for this amendment tied to the well-regulated militia, because guess who was excluded from the militia, Sam?
Black folk.
Black folk. They were not allowed into the militia until the Militia Act during the Civil War. That's why even conservative scholars have blasted Justice Scalia, saying the great originalist abandoned originalism to read his own views on gun rights and that of the NRA into the Constitution. And unfortunately, it still exists there. And the vast disparity in gun homicides and gun deaths between the US and our peer countries is also replicated within the United States. I did a study on this. I looked at the 5 states with the tightest gun control laws and the 5 states with the loosest. And the 5 states with the loosest had almost 3 times, Sam, almost 3 times the per capita rate of gun homicides as compared to the states with the loosest, with the strictest gun control laws. But you can't do it state by state because guns cross state lines. And I looked at that too. And what you find is that a huge percentage of the firearms used in crimes in tight gun control states come from loose gun control states. Do you know where this killer in New York got his semi-automatic or automatic weapon? In what state?
Nevada.
Nevada, same state that had the worst mass killing in history and has one of the loosest gun control laws. The evidence is overwhelming that the critical thing in mass shootings, and of course, generally in the incredible rate of gun deaths in the US, is the incredibly loose gun control laws that we have. And this was all tied to the biggest con job in the history of the country, this con job that, in fact, the Second Amendment protects an unlimited right for the individual to keep and bear arms. But I've got more in my mind, Sam.
What more is on your mind?
I want to revisit something we briefly visited last time.
Okay.
And that is now the EPA has officially announced that it's repealing the 2009 endangerment finding, which hardly controversially said planet warming greenhouse gases like those emitted by fossil fuels harm public health. This goes all the way back to 2009. The same year, Sam, we had that businessman's letter, right? Signed by the entire Trump family, which said, unless we do something about climate change, the consequences are going to be catastrophic for our planet and for humanity. Now, his EPA, obviously with his approval, wants to repeal the idea that greenhouse gases emission harm human health. And to do this, what did they do? They searched far and wide. 98% or so of scientists agree about the grave dangers of greenhouse gases and global warming. So somehow they found a handful of skeptics, way outside the scientific consensus to support their view, which is, 90-1 opposed by scientists that greenhouse gases are harmful. This dismantles the entire regulatory structure of our environmental regulations, not only regulations designed to curb greenhouse gases, particularly from automobiles, which are the worst source. I think one study said automobiles alone account for as much emissions of greenhouse gases as the fourth most prolifically emitting nation of the world. But it goes beyond climate change to dismantle regulations on all kinds of pollution, water pollution, air pollution, pollution of our soil, superfunds, contaminations. It's essentially giving a green light to polluting industries to enrich themselves at the expense of every other American. And once again, this should be no surprise. Trump signals what he's going to do right out in the open, right at the beginning of his campaign. He went to the big fossil fuel executives and said, you support me, and I'll let you do whatever you want. I'm not going to impose any kind of regulations on you. And that's exactly what is happening now. It's incredible what is going on here. The Center for Biological Diversity called the EPA proposal, quote, a cynical 1-2 punch that will lead to more gasoline burning vehicles on the road and rescind auto emissions rulings that were projected to prevent 7 billion metric tons of emissions from entering the atmosphere. That's 7 billion, not million tons, while saving the average American driver about $6,000 in fuel and maintenance costs over the lifetime of vehicles built to the standards. Even the Chambers of Commerce, United States Chamber of Commerce, one of the most vociferous advocates for industry, is not supporting this ruling. Their chief lobbyist called it settled law and was not seeking its repeal. And an energy attorney who had worked with the EPA and industry said, I'm not aware of anyone in industry who has really been pushing for this. Of course, the fossil fuel industries might be a real exception here. And here, once again, is an official bending and kowtowing to the political lead of Donald Trump. The head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, according to the New York Times, for years had taken moderate positions on climate change and other environmental issues. He once joined in a bipartisan caucus to break with fellow Republicans to address the issue of climate change. But of course, in the era of Trump, truth, not tyranny. You will trample on truth and you will impose your tyrannical rule.
It's interesting because, MAGA and Trump and the American right wing for 10 years now have been, yelling about the deep state and freaking out about the deep state. I think when you look at the reality of what's happening, Trump is probably creating the closest thing to what him and his supporters have been screaming about that we've ever seen in American history. He is creating the American deep state. He's firing career
Employees.
public servants. He's narrowing the scope of all these federal agencies and putting them in the hands of a few handpicked, non-elected folks that he picked and who seem to have this idea that they don't represent the American people, but they work directly for Donald Trump. So Trump, MAGA, the American right wing, are actually creating the deep state that they've been warning about for 10 years now.
Absolutely, creating the deep state, squared or cubed or quadrupled. And not only are they, imposing all these rules by these unelected bureaucrats, they're going after private institutions through the deep state in a way we've never seen before. Law firms, our finest colleges and universities. I just heard today, in addition to all the other universities they've gone after, they're going after Duke University now. We have never seen anything remotely like this, as you say, Sam, in terms of the deep state. Once again, Trump is doing exactly the opposite of what he said he was going to do. And it should, again, come as no surprise. If you look past his rhetoric about the deep state, you would see clearly right from the bat that he was actually planning the most powerful, most destructive deep state by far in the history of the country.
Yeah, they say Trump is a lot of what he says is an admission, and we see that time and time again. And I think we're seeing that now. He was rambling on about the deep state, but really he wanted to create his own deep state. That was his true ambitions, it seems.
Right. One last thing on my mind that I want to briefly mention is how Trump is using the presidency to pad his own pockets, shilling his products. And, we've seen this time and again. I just want to mention just the other day, he goes to Scotland, fine. He plays golf, and we know it's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars spent on his golf game before he's done if he holds on for 4 years. But what does he do? He promotes his private golf courses using an official trip. Guess who paid for it, Sam? You and me.
Yeah, taxpayers.
Anyone who pays taxes paid for this trip using the prestige and office of the presidency to promote his own private interests, to pad his own pocket. It's just the latest example of what we've seen of that. Now, before we get to the housekeeping, what do we got here, Sam?
Wow, that's a cool shirt, dude.
Yeah, your incredible mom and I are at the National Senior Olympics in, of all places, Des Moines, Iowa. We are both senior Olympians. She's, of course, much younger, participating in the National Senior Olympics. Karen in swimming and powerlifting, and myself in track. There are 12,500 athletes who are senior Olympians this year, the second largest number of senior Olympians in the history of the event. So, hello, all from the Senior Olympics in Des Moines, Iowa.
I have to ask you about this EU trade deal that Trump has agreed to with the EU. It seems to me like most people are saying that this is actually a big win for Trump and maybe even a big win for the US. What have you followed that at all? What's your thoughts?
I don't get that. Yeah,
Really?
it's a big win because it's not as bad as what Trump was originally threatening to do, but it's still a 15% tariff. That's terrible. Who's going to pay for that? Not Trump.
Right.
Every day American consumers are going to be paying for that. So, and I think there were some higher tariffs on other products as well. And here's another reason I'm so disillusioned with the mainstream media. And I talked at length about how they're looking in all the wrong directions when it comes to mass shootings. Well, they've fallen into the Trump trap. Let's tally up wins and loses for Trump. That's not what the media should be doing. Instead of looking at wins and loses for Trump, who should they be looking at? The American people. And is this good for the American people? Not whether it's a win for Trump. Who cares about that? And who's to decide anyway what's a win for Trump? But, the media just falls into these patterns set by Trump instead of, establishing their own independent way of judging things. I absolutely despise it when they talk about wins and loses for Trump. Who cares? It's what affects the American people that matters.
This is breaking news. Apparently there was a massive earthquake off of the eastern shore of Russia, an 8.7 magnitude
That's
earthquake.
huge.
And apparently there's tsunami warnings across the Pacific now.
Wow,
That's crazy.
that's real. But of course, we have to cut down on all our environmental protections, cut down on FEMA, our ability to deal with disasters, again, absolutely contradicting what's good for the American people.
Yeah, like I said, he's created his own deep state where the entire government answers to him. The entire government is at the whim of him and his appointees and his allies without any checks and balances. He was in a
And
mission the whole time.
there are now, I think, three whistleblowers, at least two, maybe three, who have called out Emil Bove, Trump's nominee for a lifetime position on the second highest court in the land, the Court of Appeals, dealing with his claim, we should say F you to court decisions we don't like, a corrupt deal to suspend the indictment of the corrupt mayor, Eric Adams of New York. Whistleblowers, career appointees, not, disgruntled, wild communists. And guess what? What do you think the Republicans are going to do?
Cave.
Despite probably among the most serious allegations we've ever had against a nominee to one of the highest courts in the nation, they are just all going to cave and disregard it. Explain it away. It's the Democrats trying to, sensationalize disgruntled employees. We don't believe it. They'll come up with any number of rationalizations.
Apparently, Hawaii is at great risk right now for a tsunami.
Yeah, and where is FEMA? I'm
Yeah.
sure nowhere.
Tsunami warning issued for, I guess, all the islands of Hawaii after 8.7.
Yes, no question.
That's scary. Yeah, it looks
Yeah,
like all islands are at risk. Well, we hope that doesn't happen, obviously.
we sure hope, and it's just a tragedy that Trump has gutted our ability to deal with these natural disasters.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to some quick housekeeping. We only have 341 likes. Don't forget to like the stream. It helps us a lot. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Remember that members and donations get priority on questions. What am I forgetting? That seems about it. You ready to get into some questions?
Uh, don't forget TNT. Keep that going. And yes, we very much appreciate donations and memberships. That's really important to keep us going. And even at the Senior Olympics, I'm still taking the time and the energy and the effort to speak to all of you.
Thanks for that, Dad.
Yeah.
Our first question. MAGA and other social media users continuously blame Zohan Mamdani for yesterday's shooting in Manhattan because of the shooter's race, all while this happened under Adams. Meanwhile, the same party has glorified Kyle Rittenhouse and George Zimmerman. In 2020, Trump also blamed Biden for the BLM protests that went awry while he was the sitting president. Will they ever admit that we have a gun problem in the U.S.? What are your thoughts?
Never. You know, there was one of the mass shooters a number of years ago wrote a brief manifesto in which he mocked the response of Trump and the Republicans to every mass shooting. Thoughts and prayers. He wrote this wonderful mock account that, you can keep uh, issuing all the thoughts and prayers you want forever as you want it. And guess what? You know how many of us it will stop? Zero. Zero. Have no impact. And it is absolutely untrue that mass shooters are of minority race. Most mass shooters are white U.S. citizens, including the worst mass shooters in U.S. history, are for the most part white U.S. citizens. But, if 1 out of 100 is black, then of course the MAGA people will blame it all on DEI and race.
$10 donation from Jim Blowers.
Oh, we really can do that.
They say Trump says Russia must stop the war in 12 days or he will declare secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partners. Will this have any effect? I suppose it won't stop this war.
No, it's not going to stop this war. There's no indication that Putin is going to cease this war unless he gets a huge chunk or maybe all of Ukraine. He's going to stop it only on conditions, I believe, unacceptable to the Ukrainians. And I'm not sure he believes Trump. Trump has talked big before, and what has he ever done to sanction Putin in all the time he's been in office, first and second term?
Nothing.
Nothing. So, I'm not sure Putin takes any of this really seriously. And Putin has his own agenda, and he's been playing Trump. What is it now? 7 months of the Trump administration. Remember the promise, I'll end this war in day one. We're now past 220 days and no sign of the war ending. I think Trump, is just so off on everything. Claimed he stopped something like, I forget the number, 5 or 7 wars already as president.
He said that?
What wars is he talking about?
He said that?
Something like that, yes.
That's weird. Member Vladimir Planton says, in your opinion, should America become a scientocracy where policy would be determined by scientific fact rather than by political or religious ideology like we have today?
There have been lots of movements in U.S. history to establish a scientocracy. That is, the best minds, the best brains should rule in the interests of everyone else. That kind of goes back to Plato's Republic, in which he had various gradations with, the philosopher kings at the top. The great flaw in that is who's to choose? Who's to decide, what scientists? Is it going to be the anti-vaxxers and the anti uh, climate change scientists that are going to rule us? If Trump picked them, that's who would do the rule. Winston Churchill said, and I agree with him, democracy is the worst form of government ever devised by humans, except for all others.
Right. If Trump offers Maxwell a pardon or commutation, what do you think his MAGA base will do?
His MAGA base, as Trump said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and my base wouldn't crack, and that may be true. But surprisingly, maybe not so surprisingly, the one area where his base does seem to be cracking, at least a bit, is in the Epstein scandal and Trump's possible involvement with it, and more pertinently to Trump's apparent covering up of the material pertaining to the Epstein scandal. So I wouldn't presume that, his base is going to fundamentally crack, but I think it could decline around the edges. I think he could lose 5 to 10%, and that's disaster because elections are so close, and he can't afford those kinds of defections.
While the polls show strong disapproval on the Epstein issue, Trump's approval is still frighteningly high. Do you think this issue can truly move voters come this election season?
His approval really isn't high.
I was about to say, I thought it was low.
Yeah, it's low. If you want to look at the kind of the gold standard, the poll that, compares presidents going all the way back at least to Eisenhower, he's at 37%. At this point in the presidency, the only former president to have anything like this is Trump in his first term. Usually your first 6 months to a year, your approval rating is high. 37% is really low. So in fact, when you look at the issues, he's probably worst on the Epstein scandal, but he's underwater on every other issue, including his signature issue of immigration. So, you may say his polling should be even lower, and I understand that, but he certainly has, to a great extent, suffered in the polls.
What the heck is it taking so long to shut down this corrupt regime? What is wrong with the American system that has allowed so much corruption to go unpunished? And what needs to change to ensure this never happens again?
I got a book on this. It's called 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump. And it has a whole series of fundamental reforms to restore our democracy, because the audience member is right. There are a lot of holes. And even if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, that doesn't mean other tyrannically oriented presidents couldn't exploit those holes. Perhaps the most fundamental, although difficult to achieve reform, is to get rid of the Electoral College and to create a new Senate, not equivalent to the House, but not with just 2 members per state, where, Alaska and Idaho have the same number as California or Rhode Island, but to have some kind of sliding scale representation, so the small states could not dominate the choice of a president and the policy making of the Senate. And another fundamental reform is constitutional amendment prohibiting political gerrymandering.
This is a $15 donation from OB Family. They say, Professor, would you recommend future changes to how the Supreme Court operates? For example, changes to the appointment process that might help stop decisions based on ideological bias or government pressure.
I'm not much of a supporter of term limits, but given what's happened with the Supreme Court, I think I would favor, and this would require a constitutional amendment, some kind of term limits on the Supreme Court. And I would certainly require a very rigorous code of ethics and code dealing with conflicts of interest uh, established by the Congress that would apply to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Parties who care about the 250 Venezuelans wrongfully deported to El Salvador are suing the government for human trafficking, as F-47's admin would not take them back to the U.S., so they were sent to Venezuela and traded for 10 white guys in prison over there. The government can be charged with criminal contempt. Is this human trafficking charge enough to shut down the government?
The answer is no. I wish it was, but it's incredibly difficult to successfully sue the government. You've got to show some egregious violation of the constitutional law, and any such case is going to go up to the Supreme Court, which is extremely unlikely to side with plaintiffs in a case like this against the Trump administration. Remember, this is the court that said it's perfectly okay for Trump to send people to South Sudan, people who have no ties to this war-torn country.
Thank you, Love DIY, for becoming a member. We appreciate that.
Yes, we do.
How do we actually get people to focus on how badly the big, quote unquote, big, beautiful bill is going to destroy the U.S.? So many distractions right now, like Epstein, the free airplane, Scotland, etc. We're heading back to the days when only the rich could have food, housing, and cars.
The audience member is right. We've talked about this a lot. It's the Gish Gallop. You throw out so much that it's impossible to focus on any one thing, even though probably the so-called big, beautiful bill, we call it the ugly abomination, has the greatest impact upon everyday Americans. It's part of, the tyranny side that needs to be combated with truth. And I've said this before, contact your local officials, contact your congressmen, senators, organize meetings if you can, write letters to the editor or op-eds to your local newspaper, organize people to vote and vote. Nothing is going to change until there's a fundamental change in the composition of government. You're not going to convert the MAGA people. They are not going to change. They have to be replaced.
What was your name for the big, quote unquote, big, beautiful bill?
Ugly abomination.
No, that's not a good one. You need to come up with a new one. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. What about just big, ugly bill?
I like that. That's fine.
Yeah. $20 donation from Harry Chittenden. Thank you, Harry. They say, on the topic of term limits, what are your thoughts on FDR's relentless pursuit of a third term in 1940, which of course was unprecedented and highly controversial at the time?
It was perfectly legal at the time. Since then, we've had the 22nd Amendment limiting presidents to 2 full terms, not necessarily all the 4 years, but the majority of the second term. And the voters decided. They gave FDR an overwhelming mandate. He won the popular vote 55% to 45%, 10-point margin. We haven't seen that in many, many years, decades in recent politics. He overwhelmingly won the Electoral College. And the reason was what was going on in 1940, Sam?
A war.
A war. and they weren't going to elect someone without experience. They wanted an experienced, firm, knowledgeable, steady hand. And that's why the voters chose FDR.
This is from Cosmo Trilby. They say, I'm an avowed non believer in conspiracy theories. Actually, they really piss me off. The GOP is now obsessed with conspiracy theories, and it seems to me that this has been slowly building over decades. The war on Christmas, the war on family, Anita Hill, etc., etc. I think this was heightened in the GOP during the Obama years and then accelerated to light speed with Trump. What do you think was the impetus for Republicans to start embracing conspiracy theories in the beginning?
Uh, you got my book there?
Yes.
Check out my book. I point out that conspiracy theories have always been an essential element of conservative politics in the United States, going all the way back to the origins of the modern American conservative movement right after World War II, when widespread in the United States was this conspiracy theory that a group of Jews, the elders of Zion, were manipulating the world economy and starting revolutions in order to control the world. And this was perpetrated by the leading businessman of the 1920s, Henry Ford, and widespread in conservative circles. You could fast forward to the 1950s and Joseph McCarthy's conspiracy theories about communists taking over our State Department and the so-called lavender scare of the 1950s that homosexuals were permeating our government and subverting our national security. And of course, there were no end of conspiracy theories perpetrated uh, during the 1960s and 1970s about the Black Panthers, even about the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King Jr., who was relentlessly being attacked by Director Hoover of the FBI and the right wing. So while it may seem like this is something new, in fact, it has a long and sordid history among conservatives that goes back to the origins of the modern conservative movement in the United States. And as one observer pointed out, way back then, conspiracy theories are very difficult to refute because they're not based on verifiable information. And when you try to present information to refute them, the perpetrators of the conspiracy theories just say, oh, that's the radicals, that's the commies, that's the socialists, that's the Jews, that's the gays, who whatever are trying to subvert what we know is the truth. Sad.
I held your book up that whole time. How was that?
That was quite a feat.
Yeah, it was.
How much time do we have left?
12 minutes.
Oh, keep going. We got lots of time.
We can end early if you want.
I do not want.
Okay.
Let's
Uh,
hope we get some more donations and members.
Limited Light, just with a $5 donation. They want the bill to be called the Big Brutal Bill.
I
Eh,
like I like what you had, Sam. What was it? The big ugly bill?
yeah, that rolls up. It's,
That kind of is trippingly off the tongue.
right. And it's a contrast to Beautiful, right? The Big Ugly
Yeah.
Bill. Um, our next question. Execution of Project 2025. How well is Trump doing? This is a difficult question. I see this: abuse of power, not following laws, using methods to cheat the law, etc., etc. They use a lot of examples. So, how well is Trump doing at executing Project 2025, Dad?
I'd give him an A so far. He claimed, oh, I don't know anything about this. I never looked at it. In fact, who wrote Project 2025? Was it just a bunch of random people, Sam?
No.
This is former administration staffers and officials. And the chief architect, Russell Voigt, is now head of one of the most important agencies in American government, the Office of Management and Budget. And you could look right down the line of, did I lose you there?
No, we're here.
Okay. I seem to have lost you. Oh, okay. We're back. Uh,
Never
he's doing
lost.
a splendid job of following along with Project 2025, which is not just anti-abortion, but even anti-contraception. You know what Trump just did? You know what he burned?
No.
Millions of contraceptives destined for people overseas who are subject to all kinds of STDs, sexually transmitted diseases for which contraceptives protect you. He also is destroying, I understand, and these are all, of course, in the press reports, something like 500 metric tons of food destined for starving peoples abroad. This is, part of the notion of Project 2025 that all foreign aid, not only, their massive culturally conservative views on contraception and abortion, but their idea that all foreign aid is corrupt and ought to be dismantled. Destroying food, destroying contraceptives that protect people from serious diseases. It's just astonishing what's going on here.
I agree with you. How did Mao Zedong justify the human cost of policies like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution? And how do historians today evaluate those justifications?
Well,
That's a big
pretty much,
question.
I'm not an historian of China, but I understand and I know that those justifications have been debunked. Look, you can rationalize anything, right? Rationalize burning 500 metric tons of food, rationalizing, ending all our environmental protections. You can rationalize anything, and particularly if you're extreme right or extreme left, like Mao. And Mao said, this was necessary to purge the bourgeois elements of the society and establish the new dictatorship of the proletariat.
If you had to choose between your least favorite Dem and favorite Republican for president, who would you vote for?
There's no Republican that at this point, I would vote for. Even the so-called moderate Republicans are sellouts. Look what McCursky did. The senator from Alaska, supposedly a moderate critic. She completely sold out because they bribed her with some benefits for Alaska and voted for a bill that she knew would be a disaster for the American people. Then there's Susan Collins, who's always concerned, but has yet to cast a truly consequential vote. Yes, she's cast some votes, but it was never a deciding vote. So there's no Republican office holder. Maybe some former ones like Liz Cheney, who I could vote for, or Adam Kinzinger, David Jolly, but not anyone that I see. Maybe Representative Massey, but it's very hard to find one. And
For
remember, it used to be that ideologically the parties were mixed, that there were lots of Democrats who were more conservative than Republicans and Republicans who were more liberal than Democrats. That's gone. The most conservative Democrat today in the House or the Senate is still more liberal than the most liberal Republican. There's no overlap anymore. It's like opening up a scissors, no overlap between the parties.
Professor, why do academics and scholars typically lean left?
I'm not sure they lean left. I think, look, I have been involved in hundreds of personnel decisions. at American University, where I've been for 52 years. Hirings, promotions, tenure. Not once has there been any consideration of the politics of the person involved. And by the way, in the 1950s, the professoriate was heavily Republican. Why, arguably, did it suddenly become more heavily Democratic? Because these Republicans wanted to move the professoriate to the left? No, because quite right, as I've seen in my 52 years, they made decisions based upon merit. And we pursue truth, not trying to bias our results left or right. And of course, Trump and the MAGA people only believe that the truth lies in what is consistent with their political orthodoxy, however much it may actually depart from the truth. And I've said, if you don't believe me, take a look at the 1776 Project, promulgated in the last days of the first Trump administration as the official MAGA understanding of our history and our society. And virtually every scholarly and academic organization, dozens of them, join with the American Historical Association to blast this document as having no relationship whatsoever to the past 40 years of historical scholarship. And instead of being a genuine historical document, it is a political document just designed to establish a conservative orthodoxy.
You're a smart guy, Dad.
Thank you.
Did most, or at least a disproportionately large amount of Tea Party people go on to become Trump supporters and a part of MAGA?
Absolutely.
They all did.
The Republican Party
Well, most.
absorbed the Tea Party. And office holders today in the Congress or the Senate or state legislatures who began as Tea Party are now absorbed into MAGA. Now, there are some who are not officially in government who are very much involved in the Tea Party who are critics, but for the most part, the Tea Party has been absorbed within the Republican Party, and that's very common for third party movements.
Dad,
How much time left?
I have breaking news for you, Dad.
Okay.
Something that we were talking about early on in the episode your prediction has already come true. Senate confirms Emil Bove as appeals court judge despite Democratic furor over whistleblowers.
You
So
know,
there
I
you
may have
go.
missed the
It took
2024 election, but every other prediction I've made has come true, hasn't it?
it took less than an hour for that prediction to come true.
Yeah, of course. They always cave. It makes no difference what the truth is, what the evidence is. It's irrelevant to them. They'll rationalize it away, they'll explain it away, and they'll just do whatever the MAGA does.
Right, and they have no I mean they never get held accountable for anything, it seems. Seems basically politicians, especially in, strong red district Republicans, they can do whatever they want. They're not going to be voted out. They're not going to, as long as they go along with Trump, they're not going to feel his wrath. So they have no reason to not cave every time, right?
They would if they had principles. But remember
Right,
what we said about American politics.
right.
Republicans have no principles. Democrats have no spine. That's why Republicans can't stand on principle. They don't have any. There's nothing to stand on. And by the way, while Trump's approval rating is plummeting, the Democrats are reaching an all-time low in the polls because they have no spine and no message. They need to adopt our explosive message, truth, not tyranny.
How do you like RAC? RAC. Republicans always cave.
I like that.
You like
Yeah.
that? Also, I think we should get it started. Trump's deep state, because I really do believe that he's creating the deep state that he warned about, he's actually creating.
Oh, yeah. As I said, the deep state squared, cubed.
Right. Trump's deep state, the deep state square cubed, TNT, all the
Yep.
above.
All right. How much time left?
We're at a time for this evening on this
Okay.
Lichtman Live on
Brought to
the
you by, from the
the
National
National Senior
Senior Olympics.
Games. Wow. Pretty cool stuff, Dad. All right. The good news is, if you're like, oh, Lichtman Live is ending, what the heck? The Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this. That's really exciting news. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
We need to wake up to the reality of gun violence in America. Until we do that, what happened in New York, what's happening all over the country will continue as it has to be repeated again and again and again. And the gun lobby and its supporters will continue to offer nothing but empty thoughts and prayers. And if you want to understand all of this, pre-order my book, Conservative at the Core. You can order it from Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any bookseller, or from the website of the Notre Dame University Press. It'll be out before you know it in about a month, September 1.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yep. And the Library Journal, prestigious journal, which does advanced reviews, said it was highly recommended for anyone interested in either politics or history. Both.
Both.
Both. All right. Good night.
All right, good.